Hello, welcome back to GCP Security Best Practices Q&A. This is part 5 of the series of the questions and answers. So in order to be familiar with the best practices, we will continue with, a deep dive questions and answers. Hopefully this will help you around the GCP implementation. We start with the first scenario. Your company is using GC Suite and has developed an app which meant for internal usage on Google App Engine. You need to make sure that the external users cannot gain access to the application even if the employer's password has been basically compromised. So, what shall we do? Do we enforce two-factor authentication or configure proxy or provision password using G Suite Password Sync or configure Cloud VPN between your private network and GCP? And the answer is VPN. Even if you're compromising the password of staff member, without the VPN, without the certificate, it make no value this password. So the answer is D. Configure cloud VPN between your private network and the GCP network. Next, an organization, security, and risk management team are concerned about where their responsibility lies with certain production workloads they are running in GCP and where Google responsible lies. They are mostly running workloads using GCP or PaaS in Google, including the App Engine. Which of these area technology stack will they focus on as their primary responsibility when they use App Engine? Uh, Configure monitoring VPC flow works, defending against, cross-site scripting and SQLite attacks, manage the latest update and security patches for a PaaS, or encrypting all the data getting stored. So the answer is encryption data. Because we're talking about PaaS, then the answer will be D. This is the most important part. And here we go, encryption, all the, we need to make sure they encrypt it because it's their responsibility. Next, your company operates an application instance group that is currently deployed behind Google Load Balancer, in US Central 1, which configure to use tier network in a standard mode. The infrastructure team wants to expand to second region like East region or somewhere else, and you need to set up single external IP address with distribute the request between these two regions. So basically, a traffic manager or load balancer with single IP and across two regions. What shall we do? Change the load balancer backend configuration to use network endpoint group instead of single group. Change the load balancer front end to use premium tier network on cost. The solution for B sounds right, but it's costly, so I don't want to spend money on this one, yeah? And create a new load balancer on East using standard network. No, that will not work because you have two load balancers, and I don't know how you will have single IP assigned to both. And then create a VPN connection between the two regions and enable Google private access. This one, it's reasonably acceptable, but the best answer, in my opinion, is because open like we got standard network, it will be A. Why is A? Because the load balancer backend, it's using a different endpoint. What we need to do is just change it to, using a group. When you have a group, which means you have multiple regions or multiple data centers, and the group or load balancer will take care of them. Let's have a look. The answer is A, because we are using, backend configuration with endpoint groups instead of the instance group. Okay, so endpoints, which means you can point it to which endpoint network you want to manage. Next is customer data science group wants to use GCP for the analytics workload. The company privacy dictate where the data must be reside, yeah, for the PII, and they want to use SAML 2 for their identity provider. How should you basically advise the system engineer to proceed with this approach? Okay, shall we contact Google support to initiate domain? No. Shall we register a new domain name and use the for the cloud identity? No. Do we need to ask Google to provision the data science manage account as a super admin for existing domain? The answer is nearly yes. And the last question is ask customer management to discover any other user of Google Managed Service and work with existing super admin. Now, let's we ask the Google to provision the data scientist. So I will say C in this scenario because we are trying to set up an identity and the domain managed by Google. So the answer is C because we need to ask Google to provision the data science manager's account for, as a super admin so we can consume the existing domain. Next, a customer wants to grant access to their application running, on a compute engine to write only to specific cloud storage bucket. How should you grant this? Create service account for the application and grant the app storage creator permission to the project, or create service account for the application and grant the storage object creator permission to the bucket, not to the object, or create an account and grant the admin permission and same thing for authenticate. So the answer is B because we are speaking about compute engine, hence we need to grant it to the bucket itself, the storage. Here we go. The answer is B. Create service account for the application and grant the cloud storage, object to a bucket. Next, you want to limit the image that can be used as the source of the boot disk. These images will be stored in a dedicated project. What should you do? Use organization policy service to create compute. Sounds right. Trust the image object constraint on the org level. Then list the trusted project and whitelist the allow operation. Okay, that sounds okay until the allow operation doesn't sound right, which means B is the answer. I don't need to think about the resource manager and edit org permission. So the answer is B basically, because we are talking about limitation of the use of the source for the boot disk, and it will be only for a project. When we speak about project, then we apply the policy on the org level, but we have to apply deny rather than permit. Okay, let's have a look. Yep, use the as we highlighted the image at org level and do a deny, and this is referenced by Google. Next is the customer want to deploy a large number of tier 3 application on compute engine. How should customer ensure the authentication or authenticate network separation between these two tiers or the 3 tiers? So we got 3 tiers application, and I would like to make sure I've got apply the network segregation between tier 1, 2, and 3. What shall I do? Run each tier in its own project and segregate using project label. This might apply to 1 and 3. Yeah, run each with different service account and use firewall rule. Okay, run each tier in own subnet and use subnet-based firewall. C sounds very practical and acceptable and cheaper than other options. I don't spend so many firewalls. And the last one is run each tier with its own VM tag. That one is totally different. So the answer is C. We run the each tier with its own subnet. So I've got one VNet and multiple subnet. I apply different subnet to different tier of the application and apply policies on based on the subnet here. Let's have a look. Yeah, see each with own subnet and then use the firewall based policies or rules between them. Next is your company wants to collect and analyze, CVE information for package in container image and want to prevent image with known security issues from running on GCP Kubernetes. Which two security features does Google basically recommend, including container build pipeline? Deployment policies, password policies, vulnerability scanning, network isolation. Basically, vulnerability scanning and network isolation because we're speaking about Kubernetes. I'm not worried about password policies and deployment policies. Vulnerability, making sure there's no issues, with the image I'm using, the containers, and network isolation, which is the name spacing between, the containers and the pods and nodes, just to prevent any, issues. These are the sort of overview. Next is customer need to launch three-tier application on GCP. Then the customer internal compliance requirement that end users only allowed the traffic from the specific CIDR, which means IP addresses. The customer accept there's a risk for their app when they have basically SYN or DDoS attack. They want to use GCP native SYN flood protection out of the box. What the shell would they do? Do they use Cloud Armor, VPC rules, or Cloud CDN, or Cloud Identity and Access Management? The answer is basically out of the box. I will use Cloud Armors. Here we go. And you see Cloud Armor acting like a WAF for us, which will address our requirement. Last question for this part is an engineering team is launching web application that will be public on the net. The web application is hosted on multiple GCP regions and will direct the respective backend URL request. Your team wants to avoid exposing the application directly, so they need to use what to prevent this. They need to use, like a proxy. What we have here, we have Armor, Network Load Balancer, Proxy Load Balancer, and NAT Gateway. The answer will be SSL Proxy Load Balancer. That should be addressing our requirement because it's a cloud external facing open, and we need to define deny traffic to specific IPs at the piece, so we can use that one. There we go. Security and the concept. That's all what we had for part 5. Hopefully you have learned something useful, and we will continue with part 6 with more complicated scenarios. Thank you for watching.